boogeyman.
Run, Randy, run!
Welcome to the Inferno. I'm Papa John, and I'm here to guide you through all the hellish sides of horror. And today we are talking about a new Netflix original horror movie, the first in a 3-part series, that being the Fear Street series, and the first movie is Fear Street Part 1, 1994. Now this series is based off of a R.L. Stine line of novels, or young adult horror novels, I believe. And he's the same guy that did Goosebumps, and I have read a few Goosebumps books over the years, but I've never read Fear Street or any of his other series. However, I have seen the mostly ghostly stuff, some of it from I don't know how long ago that was, 15-ish years ago. So in this first part, it's supposed to be kind of a throwback to 90s slashers and 90s horror, and it does feel like a throwback slasher. To me personally, it feels more like an 80s throwback than a 90s one, and especially aesthetically speaking, with its bright colors and everything. It feels much more like an 80s slasher than it does like a postmodern Scream-esque slasher. When it comes to the horror elements and horror sequences and slasher elements and kill scenes and all of that, it is really good. The opening scene is great. I loved the opening scene, and it made me excited for the rest of the movie, even though it didn't quite live up to all of that. But it does have some great horror sequences in it. Kind of the climactic sequence, even though there's a couple things I wasn't a big fan of with how they handled sort of killing someone and bringing them back to life. There are kill scenes in that sequence, in the climactic sequence, that are, one in particular is like one of the best kill scenes in years, up there with like the wine bottle scene from the opening of Freaky. And the soundtrack is really good here. I loved the soundtrack. Sound design as a whole, I had some issues with, because when it comes to the use of some of the score elements rather than full soundtrack elements, the score at times feels a little over the top. But when it comes to the actual soundtrack and using like 90s songs, they all go well together. There's like this great moment where it transitions from like Insane in the Brain by Cypress Hill to Radiohead's Creep, where it just like seamlessly transitions from one to the other. And so it's got a pretty damn good soundtrack to it. But honestly, as a whole, I was actually fairly disappointed by this movie, because the acting, it's like free-form CW, Riverdale type of acting, and I can enjoy some of that stuff. You know, the first 2 seasons of Riverdale were fine. The 3rd season was a pile of heaping dog shit, and I couldn't believe I watched all the way to the finale, but I gave up after that. Because that being said, this movie, that's not entirely what I wanted from this movie. I wanted like a nice throwback horror movie. But being it's R.L. Stine, it obviously has kind of that more young adult, goosebumpsy, mostly ghostly type of feel to it. However, that's kind of the problem, is it feels like it's combating with itself. Because it's trying to be like this hard R version of Goosebumps. That's really what it feels like. I like the story, and it's written very well for what it is. But the problem is, the actual tone of the movie feels different from the tone of the story. Because the story and the script feels like Cartoon Network type of movie. It feels like a really good kind of Cartoon Network TV horror movie for kids. Whereas the actual tone of the movie feels more like this fun, hard R, freaky-esque movie. And it just feels like it's combating with itself. It doesn't know what it is or what it's trying to be. And that's where I kind of have some issues. It has way too much like over-the-top teenage drama in it. And there's just stuff that's just too ridiculous to me. As someone who rode a school bus, there's a scene involving a school bus where stuff happens that I don't even believe in the 1994, kids could actually get away with while riding a school bus. And that really kind of bugged me during that sequence, and there's a couple things like that here. So what Circle of Hell does Fear Street Part 1, 1994 belong in? I do think there's some fun enjoyment in there that's actually really good and makes it fairly watchable, but at the same time, it's a movie that feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be. It doesn't know if it wants to be sort of this gateway horror movie, gateway PG-13-esque goosebumpsy horror movie, or whether it wants to be a hard R throwback slasher. It doesn't entirely ever make up its mind. It is rated R, obviously, and there's some hard R moments. So obviously the producers and directors made up their mind. The movie itself feels like it's combating between the two sides, and that really holds it back for me personally. And that's why I'm really just going to put the first Fear Street in probably the fourth Circle of Hell as just a meh horror movie. Go ahead and tell me your thoughts on the first part of the Fear Street series or trilogy. Personally, even though I didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted, I'm still excited for the next couple parts, especially the next one, the 1978 one, that I feel like is going to be an actual throwback to like old school campground slashers, and the slasher in it looks like it's going to be a Sackhead for homage to Sackhead Jason, which is like and part 2 is one of my favorite Friday the 13th movies, and so I'm really looking forward to that. And honestly, I'm still looking forward to the 1666 one, but not quite as much now. However, I still plan on hopefully reviewing both of the other parts, but go ahead and tell me your thoughts on the first part. And if you enjoyed this review, go ahead and smash that thumbs up icon, smash that subscribe button, hit that notification bell as well, and as always, have one hell of a good time.